In February 1989, the last Soviet soldier crossed the Friendship Bridge out of Afghanistan. The cameras followed him home. Western headlines called it a Soviet Vietnam, a humiliation for the superpower. In Washington, it felt like vindication. But in Peshawar, in Khost, in the guest houses and camps along the border, the war was not over. The men who had come to fight the Soviets were still there, and they were asking what came next. This is part 2. The proxy war is finished. What follows is the blowback. In Western capitals, the conclusion is simple. Mission accomplished. The invader has been driven out. But Afghanistan is not at peace. The communist government of Mohammad Najibullah clings to power longer than almost anyone predicted. 3 more years, through shelling and siege and mass defection. The Mujahideen factions, backed by Pakistan, try to take Jalalabad by storm in the spring of 1989. It fails, tens of thousands of casualties. The factions cannot agree on a government, a commander, or a plan. Billions of dollars in arms remain in the country. Tens of thousands of trained fighters now have no common enemy, only rival commanders and new causes. Washington largely moves on. The Cold War is ending. The files are closed. The cameras leave. Everything after looks like someone else's problem. In April 1992, Najibullah's government finally collapses. The Mujahideen enter Kabul. The civil war, the one no one wanted to talk about, begins in earnest. Hekmatyar, the commander the ISI had most favored, fires rockets into the city he claims to want to liberate. Thousands of civilians die in artillery exchanges between factions that had been allies weeks before. Between 1992 and 1996, Kabul is destroyed more thoroughly by Mujahideen infighting than it ever was by Soviet bombing. 50,000 civilians die. The capital that once had cinemas and universities becomes a ruin. In the south, in the province of Kandahar, something new is forming. Religious students, Talibs, begin gathering around a one-eyed cleric named Mullah Omar. The founding story is this. In 1994, local commanders are abusing the population. Mullah Omar takes 30 men and a small cache of weapons to stop them. Word spreads. More men join. Whether that story is fully true or constructed after the fact, the Taliban's actual rise depends on something more concrete: Pakistani support. The ISI sees in the Taliban an opportunity to install a client government in Kabul. Saudi money flows in again, this time to the Taliban directly. The Gulf states see a Sunni government keeping Iranian influence out of Afghanistan. Different funders, different faction, same logic. The Taliban advance is rapid. By 1995, they control the south. In September 1996, they enter Kabul. Mohammad Najibullah, the former communist president, is found in his UN sanctuary, dragged out and killed in the street. The Taliban impose their system on the population. Women removed from schools and workplaces, music banned, television banned, public executions in the football stadium. And they have a guest they are ready to welcome back. In 1996, Osama bin Laden returns to Afghanistan, this time under Taliban protection. He has been away. He has been planning. In 1988, as the Soviets prepare to leave, Osama bin Laden and a small group of associates create a new organization, al-Qaeda, the base. It grows out of the same soil as the war. Foreign volunteers radicalized in Afghanistan, trained in camps along the border, connected through Maktab al-Khidamat's guest houses and funding networks. In November 1989, Abdullah Azam is killed by a car bomb in Peshawar. No one claims responsibility. The investigation is never completed. His murder is one of the unresolved questions of the Afghan war. With Azam gone, bin Laden takes full control of what remains of the network. He and Zawahiri begin to shift its direction. Azam had argued for fighting local oppressors. They argue for something larger. The veterans of the Afghan war scatter across the world, to Algeria, Bosnia, Chechnya, the Philippines, Somalia, Egypt, Yemen. They carry 2 things with them: a conviction that superpower militaries can be defeated and the tactical knowledge of how. Here is where the argument begins. Some critics say the West created al-Qaeda, that by paying for a jihad against the Soviets, the CIA and its allies effectively armed their future enemy. Many historians and former officials reject that simple story. They point out there is no evidence of direct CIA funding to bin Laden, only to Afghan factions he sometimes fought alongside. The documents show something more complicated: an American, Saudi, Pakistani operation that built up Islamist factions in Afghanistan, and a separate Arab volunteer network that grew in the same space, using some of the same pipelines. In Khost and other regions, bin Laden helps construct fortified camps and tunnels. For the CIA, these are useful staging areas against Moscow. For his followers, they become the cradle of a new organization. When the Soviet war ends, many foreign volunteers do not simply go home and forget. They carry two lessons into the 1990s: that a superpower can be beaten, and that transnational jihad is possible. Al-Qaeda is built from those veterans, those camps, those roots, from a war the CIA helped to finance but never controlled. Between 1992 and 1996, bin Laden is not in Afghanistan. He is in Sudan, building roads, building businesses, building a network. The Sudanese government, run by an Islamist regime, welcomes him. American pressure eventually forces Sudan to expel him. In 1996, he returns to Afghanistan, where the Taliban have just seized Kabul and are willing to provide protection. From a cave complex in Jalalabad, bin Laden issues his first major declaration: a message to the Muslim world. It names the United States, not the Soviet Union, not a local regime, as the primary enemy. In 1998, he goes further. Together with Zawahiri and leaders of 4 other organizations, he signs a fatwa, a religious ruling, declaring that killing Americans, civilian and military, is the individual duty of every Muslim. The strategic logic is this: attack America directly, provoke a massive military response, draw that response into the Muslim world, and use it to radicalize millions. The enemy's strength becomes a recruiting tool. Inside the jihadist world, the strategy is controversial. Many veteran commanders from the Afghan war argue that the real enemy is local, the corrupt governments of their own countries. Bin Laden and Zawahiri disagree. Under Taliban protection, al-Qaeda's training camps in Afghanistan fill again. A new generation, many of them with no connection to the original Afghan war, arrive for training. The camps are now optimized for a different kind of operation. In the 1990s, the targets change. In February 1993, a bomb explodes in the parking garage beneath the World Trade Center in New York. 6 people are killed. More than 1,000 are injured. The group behind it includes veterans of the Afghan jihad. Al-Qaeda is not directly responsible for 1993. But the network that made it possible, the guest houses, the veteran connections, the ideology, is the same network the Afghan war built. Al-Qaeda shifts its focus from local regimes to the United States itself, the distant power that armed the anti-Soviet war, then stationed troops in Saudi Arabia and enforced sanctions on Iraq. 1998. Bombs destroy US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. 224 people are killed. More than 4,000 are wounded. The majority of the dead are not American. They are Kenyan and Tanzanian. The Clinton administration responds with cruise missiles, 79 of them fired at al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan and a pharmaceutical factory in Sudan. The camps are empty. The factory turns out to have no proven connection to al-Qaeda. Bin Laden is not deterred. He is reported to have laughed. 2000. A suicide attack tears a hole in the USS Cole in Yemen. American intelligence agencies accumulate warnings and fragments, intercepts, informants, reports from foreign services. The pieces exist, but there is a structural wall between the FBI and CIA that keeps them from sharing. No one assembles the picture in time. And then, September 11, 2001, when al-Qaeda operatives, many with Afghan training in their past, bring their war directly to American cities. The United States responds with a new war in Afghanistan, this time against some of the same networks it once saw as useful allies. It will become the longest war in American history. 20 years, $2 trillion, 240,000 people dead, soldiers and civilians, Afghan and American, NATO and Pakistani. The last American soldier leaves in August 2021. So what does the historical record actually tell us? Operation Cyclone documents show large payments to Afghan commanders through Pakistan's ISI. They do not show direct CIA payments to bin Laden. Interviews with former officers describe caution, even discomfort, about Arab volunteers. But they also admit that a detailed picture of those networks was often missing. The 9/11 Commission concludes that there is no credible evidence the US government knowingly supported al-Qaeda. But the Commission also documents in precise detail how the Afghan infrastructure, the camps, the networks, the fundraising pipelines, enabled what followed. Steve Cole's definitive account of the CIA in Afghanistan, Ghost Wars, published in 2004, documents the same paradox. A successful covert operation executed within its own logic that produced consequences no one in Langley had planned for. A political scientist named Chalmers Johnson published a book called Blowback in the year 2000, before the September 11th attacks. He argued that American covert operations would produce violent reactions the American public would not understand, because the actions that provoked them were secret. Scholars draw a line not of direct control, but of blowback, a war funded and shaped by outside powers whose long-term consequences were neither planned nor fully understood. In that sense, this story is less about a secret plot to create an enemy, and more about what happens when short-term victories are pursued without a plan for what comes next. History rarely offers simple villains and simple victims. In Afghanistan, it offers something more unsettling. A story in which governments, intelligence services, charities, clerics and volunteers all helped build a fire no one fully controlled. Operation Cyclone achieved its immediate goal. The Soviet Union left. The Cold War ended. But some of the men who passed through that war, trained in those camps, moving along those pipelines, later called themselves al-Qaeda. They turned the techniques of a proxy war into the tools of a global terror network. And the country at the center of it all, Afghanistan, never got its peace. Not after the Soviets, not after the Civil War, not after 20 years of American troops. Not yet. The story of Operation Cyclone is a reminder that history does not end when the funding stops or when the last foreign soldier goes home. Sometimes it continues, in the lives of the men left behind, and in the enemies they decide to fight next. In our next episode, the story goes back to the country where this all began. In 1953, the CIA helped remove Iran's elected leader. 26 years later, Iran exploded. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 was not inevitable. There was a moment, one decision, one phone call, when it could have been stopped. Subscribe so you don't miss that story and the others that show how close the world has come to the brink.